out there, welcome to another live stream from us here at AutoCrit. Today we're going to be tackling repetition, how to avoid repetition, how to make sure repetition doesn't happen too frequently. Hello there, welcome to another live. I'm just kidding, I'm not going to do that to you, but yes, repetition can be highly frustrating because it's doing just that. It's treading water, it's saying something you've already said before, it keeps reiterating the same. Now see, I'm doing it. But when you constantly are just, turning your gears in the same exact spot, well, your audience is going to get frustrated. Your audience is going to get annoyed. They may even tune out of your book altogether. So today we're going to discuss what repetition is in novels, maybe some forms of repetition that you haven't seen before, you haven't really thought of before, right? Because it's not just as simple as repeating your words. There's more to it than that. And we're going to even look at how AutoCrit can help you with this problem, with this repetition problem. So first, let's go ahead and discuss what repetition even is. And in order to do that, well, I need to start talking about the different types of repetition. So how many different types are there? Well, it probably depends on how you define repetition and all of that. But there are a few specifically that I want to focus on today. It will get us off to a good start at least and help you think about it beyond, like I said, beyond just thinking of repeating the same word or the same phrase. So one form of repetition that can come up is concept repetition. This is where you aren't repeating the exact same phrase or the exact same word, but you are not adding anything by talking about it again. So, generally speaking, this gets a little hairy because generally speaking, even if you use a synonym for a word, synonyms are not exact duplicates of each other, right? So if you say something is big and then you say something is huge and then you say something is immense, there's different connotations to those words, there's different weights to those words. So it can benefit you sometimes. But then there's other times that really you're not using that other word to get more information across to the reader. You're just doing it because maybe you're not sure if they got the point. Maybe you're kind of clearing your throat. Maybe you can't figure out the best way to phrase it. And what you would be best off doing is instead of including all the various ways that you could describe the same exact concept, you picked the best one, right? Because how many times do we need to have the same thing spoken about? Somebody said the sound's low. Here, I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to move my microphone. There, that should be better. I'm just going to hold it like I'm an MC on a game show or something. All right. So show don't tell is one reason why this comes up a lot. And the reason is that readers or writers are told show, don't tell. Or as we like to say around AutoCrit, we like to say demonstrate, don't simplify, or dramatize, don't summarize. We've had whole big workshops about it and everything. But what often happens is after writers will hear this piece of advice, they'll decide to go ahead and demonstrate. They'll go ahead and dramatize, right? But the problem is they left in that summarizing. So they still have, he was angry on top of, he clenched his fist, his veins pulsed, the sweat furrowed on his brow or whatever it is, right? But you'll also have he was angry. And you really don't need to button up the he was angry on top of all of the demonstrations of how the person got angry, right? Because we're already getting that. And so this could be frustrating to an audience member because not only are you wasting time instead of getting further into the story, you're also somewhat demeaning to them, right? Because they're like, I got it. I know that the person was angry. It's obvious, right? That's what you act like when you're angry. So you don't really need to tell me that. And it can feel a little juvenile, to be honest. Furrowing sweat sounds like a serious condition. Yes, 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 it is. It's a very serious condition. It's called making up an example on the fly. Yes. So this is what I call show and tell. And while this was great in preschool days, this is not generally a great idea when you're writing a novel. Now, there are times that you'll want to do this. And we'll kind of get to that a little bit later when we talk about other forms of repetition. There are times that perhaps you will, in fact, want to show and tell because the point is that important. You want that summary statement. Maybe you want that pow ending to your paragraph, right? So you have all this description and then you're like, and it was, that's fine. But you can't do it all the time, and you certainly shouldn't do it too often because, again, it can be patronizing to the reader. It can make them feel like you doubt that they're able to read between the lines, and it slows everything down. All right. So, what's another form of repetition? Rhythm repetition. It also sounds like something someone would write. Yes. Maybe I have read The Furrowing Sweat. I don't know. But rhythm repetition, this is when you have a bunch of words in a row that have a similar rhythmatic structure. Now, this can be done intentionally, right? Shakespeare is written in iambic pentameter, right? And it gives it that sound. It gives it that beautiful sound. Dr. Seuss is written in a strict meter a lot of the time. This gives it a very sing-songy sound. Generally speaking, though, as novelists, we don't want this because we don't want the audience to be pulled into the realm of poetry where they're really thinking about the devices we're using to talk about the concepts, the literary style. We want them to be thinking more about the story a lot of the time. It's what some people call it, a transparent narrator or a transparent prose kind of concept. Now, this isn't everybody, and there might be parts of your story that you do deliberately do this, right? You might want to have a part where the person is looking out at the ocean and you want it to feel kind of sing songy and it goes that direction. Of course, if you literally have poetry in your book, you'd want this too. But what you don't want to do is do this unintentionally, especially about something mundane. So if you have the back and the forth and the back and the forth and the back and the forth, and it's like they went to the store and the store was nice and the store was this and inside was this and they got this and then that. If you just do that kind of back and forth, you kind of lull your audience into that sort of state where like do 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 do. Useful when portraying insanity. Yes, there are reasons why you might want to use these devices purposefully, right? Right. If somebody's kind of treading water in their own head, yeah, I could see that working. But again, be careful when you do that, right? Anytime you're treading water, you're not moving forward. You're asking the audience to be very invested in what you're talking about over and over again, and you run the risk of boring them before you move on to the next subject. Momentum and impact is something to keep in mind when it comes to rhythm. Maybe it's easier for me because I come from more of a musical background, but we can certainly think of musical pieces that do this well. And the longer the piece is, generally, the more varied the structure is going to be. So, and also the less varied it is, the more tendency it has to become a little bit annoying. Something like Baby Shark or something highly memorable, but often can be grating because of the repetition, right? Whereas if you're talking about a longer form, even pop music, when you think of longer form pop songs like Bohemian Rhapsody or American Pie or things like that, there's a lot of variance in the rhythm. There's a lot of variance in the tempo, all different kinds of things. And granted, we cannot. Oh, I'm glad somebody mentioned this. Yes. What about Bolero by Ravel? I'm going to get there in a moment. Um, but we can't actually direct people like musical notation into tempo, but we can kind of cheat it. And one way is with the way that we structure our words. Longer words are going to slow people down. Multi-syllable words are going to slow people down. It just takes longer to go, through the sentence. You have commas and other punctuation. The way you structure your sentence can vary that. M dashes, ellipses, as long as you use them properly. Don't go out of your. I've seen people try to use it as if it's like poetry and they're forgetting all the rules of grammar, and don't do that. But if you're following the rules of grammar, it can have that impact, right? And you can vary that structure. Now, when it comes to something like Bolero by Ravel, that is one of those pieces that the purpose of it is to have that constant move, and it moves forward and it moves forward and it moves forward, and there's something semi erotic about it in many ways. At least people take that approach. It just builds and builds and builds this dramatic crescendo, right? Yeah, there's certainly moments in works when you can do that. But that being said, as much as Bolero is a fairly long piece, you can certainly find longer pieces of classical music like symphonies and stuff, and they're going to have much more variance, right? It is still, all things considered, short in its genre to some extent. So keep that in mind, and also keep in mind that it makes it stand out as a specific sort of work. And again, maybe that's your point. Maybe you're trying to do a Dr. Seuss or a Shakespeare. You're trying to write a work where people are going to pay a lot of attention to that rhythm. Fair enough. But just make sure you're doing that purposefully. Now, you might, well, actually, wait, I'm going to go to the next slide first, and then I'm going to talk a little bit deeper about that, because that's length repetition is my next point. Sentence length. So, not just like how the words are structured, right? But sentence length can make a big difference because that can help control the rhythm. A lot of short sentences people will read like a staccato. He froze, dogs barked, pigs flew, whatever. You do that, da, 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 it'll because you're stopping every period, right? So if you only have 2 words, period, 2 words, period, 2 words, period, you're going to get that staccato rhythm. And again, this is something that's a great device to use for a bit, but you don't want to use it too many times in a row, or you're going to lull the audience into it's kind of a boring sort of state because you're not. It's also confusing because generally speaking, when you talk about something at greater length, what you're implying is that it's more important. So you don't necessarily want to give the audience the feeling that everything is equal important because you're talking about everything at the same length. Now, this is a part of writing that AutoCrit is really helpful about. Let me go ahead, if I can here, and bring up the writer's desk and show length repetition in AutoCrit. Let's see here. Can I do it? Ooh, look at that. I know it's very small. I apologize for that. Let me try to zoom in a bit here so you can actually kind of read what's going on. There we go. And so what you would want to do is you would want to look at pacing and momentum, and you would want to look at your sentence variation, right? And I know it's not technically in repetition, but this is what it's helping with. We wanted to make because we know a lot of users aren't going to watch videos like this. We didn't want to put repetition as anything but word repetition, exact word repetition, which we'll get to a little bit later. But it is all part of repetition. But anyway, what you want to see is, first of all, how long are your sentences in relation to what you're comparing against? Now, this is not something where if you're off, it means you need to change your style. It could mean that you just are not sure how to position yourself for an audience. You might be saying, "Oh, I write a lot like Suzanne Collins," and it's like, well, actually, no, you don't. You write a lot more like Stephen King or something like that. Nothing wrong with that. You're going to see a wide variety of sentence lengths. Now, if you're quite an outlier, like your sentence lengths are like 18 words or longer or something like that, even 15 words pretty long. Yeah, you may want to look at that and see whether or not you are hurting yourself for audience relatability because they're just not used to seeing that as a normal occurrence. But anyway, when I'm talking about repetition, what I want you to do is scroll down and I want you to look at this heartbeat of your book. That's what I call it. It's like ba-doop, 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 ba-doop. You see that? That's what you want. You want that kind of heartbeat appearance. Ba-doop, ba-doop, ba-doop. Because what that shows you is the tempo of your book. It's a little bit like music, isn't it? Like watching sound waves. And the longer sentences should, in general, be about more important things or more complicated things to think about. Now, if you have a few in a row, that means you're slowing things down a little bit. If you have a lot in a row, that means you're slowing things down a lot. What you will find when you go through famous works, I'm just going to keep scrolling. It's fun to look at. What you'll find when you look at famous works is if you find a block, you go there and you will see that it's usually a plot point. It is often the call to adventure, the midpoint, the disaster, whatever you want to call it in the plot, in your plot beat lingo. um, that is something you will find. And that is because they want to bring that attention to those scenes, right? Again, when you talk about something at a greater length, you're giving the impression that it's more important. It also does slow down the reader. So, in general, just the length of the sentence, the amount of words in a sentence can make a major impact, right? This is not even repeating the concept. It's saying, instead of saying, the waterfall was beautiful. Well, obviously, if you say, the waterfall had rushing rivers of vibrant blue and you just keep going, well, you're making it sound like that waterfall is awfully important, right? So, page blindness is so real. That's a good question. Is this more naturally created or intentional? I don't know. This is always one of those things I ask myself sometimes when I notice these patterns. I think a lot of these patterns are unintentional. It's just subconscious, right? You just know it's psychology, right? We know that the more we talk about something and the more we kind of zoom in on something, the more important it seems. This is part of film literature or film language, right? If you want to show an object's importance, you do this, slow shot zooming in on it, and all of a sudden you're like, whoa, that doorknob's really important, right? And so it's the same thing when you're writing. And I think people do realize this even if they don't consciously realize this. I think this is just part of human nature that people understand. And you can do the same thing with your paragraph variation as well. Paragraphs, you'll see where your paragraph lengths are. And this is another way where you should see a heartbeat, do-do, 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 not bad. This one's very long, so that would be interesting. And sometimes you want to look at those outliers, right? Because you will have them, and that's great. Like, look at this one. This must be like a chapter header or something. This is a work in progress. So I make no excuses for it. But you have a 9-word paragraph and a 14-word paragraph with a 113-word paragraph right in the middle. That's quite a break in the rhythm. So, you might want to look at that and see, did I actually do that intentionally or not? Paragraphs are a bit arbitrary in writing novels. There's no grammatical rule about what makes up a paragraph. It really has a lot to do with how you want the information processed to the reader on the page, which I know can drive some people crazy, especially those of you who grew up in school with like essays and you need your main idea and supporting sentences. And yes, if you're writing a newspaper article, that's great. But when you are writing a novel, no, that is not the case. You do not, in fact, have to do that. All right, so let's move on to some other points of advice here. What are some other things you need to look at? Well, this gets to my point I just said. If everything is equal, then nothing is special. And that is why you want to vary your repetition. It does become hypnotic after a while if you are just keep repeating yourself, or if you have that same sentence length or paragraph length. These are all things that will happen subconsciously as well. And it's one reason why it's so fantastic to have software like AutoCrit to help, because you would not necessarily see it, and even your critics wouldn't necessarily see it. They may know that there's something broken. They might be like, there's something about your writing, it's kind of slow. You might find that they're tuning out, but they won't be able to tell you because they're not counting all those words necessarily, right? I mean, they might be able to see it a little bit, but often it's hard to tell, but you can tell with that. And I have, in fact, you might be like, well, aren't all books like that? No, I have, people, especially newer writers that submit works to me, I will see it and it'll flatline, the flatline somewhere. It'll be like, and that's all it is, and that's not what you want. To show a character's personality quirk, like Monk being OCD, would you write repeated example of his behavior or write one big dramatic example? It really depends on how you do it, because this is what you don't want to do. You don't want to just constantly say, they were OCD, they were OCD, they were OCD. And I don't think that's what you were saying. You're saying showing it, right? I think when you show something like that, like a personality quirk, what you often do is you add nuance, because what you're showing is how that quirk manifests itself in their life. So at the point in which you're asking how much do I need to show it, it really depends on how important that quirk is to the story. Is the quirk just because you thought it would be kind of fun, it's interesting to play with, or is the quirk gonna matter to the story in some way? That is kind of where you get at, and where you have to find that balance. Because ultimately, you could do a wonderful exploration of a very nuanced view of what it's like to live with OCD, but that may have very little bearing on the quest that the hero is on. And so therefore, that's kind of distracting from what your story is really about. So that would be the answer for that. Like a lot of things, it's subjective. Not a fine thing. All right, so then there is sound repetition. Now, sound repetition often comes in the form of alliteration or assonance, where you you have similar sounding sounds and you put them on top of each other on purpose. So if you do a lot of L sounds, la 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 la, there's something kind of tranquil about that. A lot of can sound very harsh, you know. The cutting wait, the whatever Carl cut his cuticle on the cubicle, you know. Uh, and yes, it does sound kind of silly after a bit. Too much alliteration can bring attention to itself because it's not natural. It's not naturally how we form sentences. It can sound more like a children's book. And but on the other hand, a little bit can go a long way. So doing a little bit can be helpful. It's definitely helpful to remember things. This is also why there's rules. Well, like guidelines, but there's rules like don't name characters with the same first letter, right, or the first same phonetic sound, because that's harder to track. Again, it's that repetition, right? As soon as you as soon as you have a bunch of those characters in the same scene, you have some problems. On the other hand, it can give a classical feel. I feel like Tolkien did this. He has sound repetition, similar sounds of characters, similar sounds of places and stuff, and it makes it feel, in a sense, kind of more real because there's more limitation in terms of the phonetic sounds being used. But on the other hand, it can confuse people, Sauron or Saruman or what is the dwarves and hobbits and things like that. Robert Jordan Love Disease. I think he was kind of mimicking Tolkien in that effect. Older works will do this more often. You'll have characters with rhyming, like twins with rhyming names and things like that. But again, you just got to be careful about it, why you're using it, because it can bring a lot of unnecessary attention to itself. And, you want ultimately a lot of what we're suggesting is based on the premise that what you want is something similar to the common trend now, which is you're focusing more on the story. Your prose is disappearing a bit. But again, you can get stylistic and it does get subjective. All right, which brings us to exact repetition. This is probably what you thought you were signing up for in the first place. You're like, I don't even know about all that other stuff. Yes, exact repetition is when you use the same words and the same exact words, which means you're not really adding anything, right? You're not even using a synonym. You're saying dog and then dog and then dog and then dog. You're not using like dog and then brute and then mongrel or whatever, like to try to give more shading to what you're talking about. This is a very dangerous thing to do from the standpoint of, well, you're not adding any information. The audience already has heard that. Whether or not they need to hear it again depends on the importance of the item and whether or not you are building on it. So you're not going to avoid repetition all the time. Of course you can. First of all, there are words that are common enough you're going to repeat them, right? But even words beyond that, words beyond the these, the a's, the whatever, the top 200 words, even beyond that, you still are going to repeat words because what it does is it allows you to build momentum. Because every new sentence doesn't need to be completely new information, right? It's not like you're starting from scratch every time, or you need to make the audience feel like you're starting from scratch every time. Now, when it comes to the repeated words reports in AutoCrit, they can help you with those differences because we have different reports for a different style of repetition, a different place where you find that repetition. And so it can be helpful rather than kind of lumping them all together. So let's bring this back up here. Let me scroll on down. Let me close this and scroll down here. All right. Sorry, I have it kind of in a weird view because I'm trying to zoom in so you can see it on the screen. All right. So if you go in, hold on here, let me refresh my browser. If you go in here to repeated words, then the repeated words report, what it's going to do is it's going to show you words that are repeating within a small window. It's like a few paragraphs. It's not very long. And the idea is that it's really just a few sentences. And the idea is that within that short time frame, you might notice as a reader that those words are repeating. So here I have rocks and rocks, and I have the character name Audra and Audra, and I have Cliff and Cliff, and I have ceiling, and so on. Now, what you'll notice is that in comparison to the average book, I was comparing against sci-fi for this example, I'm well within normal. So having this much repetition is actually fairly normal. And you might be like, wow, that's a lot. But no, because this is what we do. A lot of it is character name. A lot of it is just, again, building on itself. Now, where I think it can be helpful though is to still look at it and just make sure that you're not missing out on opportunities, right? Because just because you can get away with it doesn't mean you should, right? So, would you want, it says at the end of it stood, and then she said, is she near the end? Well, maybe I could clarify what is at the end, right? Why did I go so generic there? Um, Here I have necklaces, necklaces, necklaces. I don't know if I need to use different word for that because that's an important object. So that's fine. But then I have, she pulled on his arm and then she pulled out a wrench. Maybe I want to show that kind of consistent rhythm, but maybe I don't. Maybe I'd rather had a more specific verb for the arm, more specific verb for the wrench, something like that. Give a little more information. I have crowd several times. There's a fair amount of repetition here. I think there is opportunity, even if this isn't a big outlier, to go through and add some more specificity in the words. And then we get to the word frequency report. So the word frequency report, this looks at your entire document. And so it's not going to compare to any other book because no other book is like your book, right? So your book, you might be talking about, a pond. It might be very important in your book. Another book won't. And so the fact you have pond a whole bunch of times is not that important. So I mean, I'm sorry, it does compare, but you have to keep that in mind. Excuse me. It will compare, but you have to keep in mind whether or not you are using words more often for the purpose of your story. So, for example, here, Serene, the reason why Serene is so high is because it's actually a character name. And I would actually want to go into my settings and tell it to ignore that word. And you might even tell it to ignore other words if you want, so you don't get those sort of false flags. What you're looking for is whether or not you're using kind of common words more often, because that does show an opportunity. And here's a big one: crowd, crowd, crowd. And yes, this is where there's a whole bunch of people, right? But is there an opportunity I could perhaps use another word to describe the crowd, especially from her point of view, a less generic word? Perhaps even go into more detail about who's in the crowd or something like that. Did I get maybe a bit generic? Perhaps. It would be worth looking at. You love the word cloud. The word cloud is very, very helpful. I love this. Very, very exactly. Worst case repetition plus evil. Abrams, he was very, 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 very happy. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely as well. Not a good idea to have Matt wipe his feet on a mat on his way to pick a matte or glossy finish. I mean, if you're writing like Douglas Adams, fantastic. And I love sentences like that. But yes, only in the realm of satire would that make sense. I have a section where discussions are discussing memory. It's a dance to not use the word way too much. Right. And then the other problem too is you don't want to get overly clever, right? Because you don't want to be like, memory, uh, thought, flashback. I'm trying to think of other words, database, like you don't want to just start pulling in random synonyms just for the sake of it. Now, if you do want to pull in a synonym, you do have a thesaurus well within AutoCrit. It's a rather abstract one, so it'll give you a lot of ideas of different ways to go. And it's this little, it looks like a little scroll. It's above the Grammarly logo. Which, by the way, yes, now we do integrate with Grammarly for our grammar. So that's pretty cool. But yeah, so like crowd, we're getting a lot of weird kind of results here. It is, like I said, it's a rather abstract thesaurus. And yeah, just stay tuned to that spot. That's all I'm going to say about that. Phrase frequency. This is where you have a bunch of words in a row. And this can be extremely helpful. This might be my favorite of all of our reports because this is something where the audience is most likely going to clue in that you are repeating yourself, particularly if you have a whole bunch. So, like here, I have explode from excitement. And yes, the reason why I'm repeating it is because a little girl says, I'm just going to explode from excitement. And the other person's like, you can't really explode from excitement, can you? And yeah, and again, this is an early writing of mine. You can criticize the dialogue, but at least it made sense, right? That they were doing that. This is one of my trunk novels that maybe one day I'll redo. Um, maybe I should do that. That would be a fun project, right? Should I do that? I should do like a taking my trunk and fixing it in like real time. Not in real. You don't need to watch the whole process, but that could be a fun. That could be a fun one pay a lot of attention to. Yeah, it really is because what you want to avoid is like the classic where people will point it out. They're like, every time a zombie shows up in your work, it's like, they saw the face of death in their eyes. And it's like, and then later it's they saw the face of death in their eyes. And you're like, okay, I got it. You see the face of death in their eyes. Like sometimes this is helpful to just reiterate that point, but often no. If you have a really clever way of phrasing it and it's like, oh, that's a great, strong description, use it and then move on. Find another way to talk about it as well. When it's difficult pointing out which character is speaking, how do you not repeat proper nouns and pronouns? No, that is absolutely true. You do have to do that. And actually, this repetition report, the repeated words and the word frequency and the phrase, the phrase frequency will, but the word frequency, repeated words ignores commonly used words. Like he, she, they, because we know they're going to come up a lot. Just there's kind of the glue words that hold our language together. Yeah, that's not going to be a problem. So don't expect that. Wow, Sharon, I'm sorry about that. The phrase frequency feature is pointing out how lazy you get sometimes. Yes, that's really the whole point. It's that blind spot, especially if you're talking about a whole work, right? You have an 80,000 word novel. What are the odds that you're going to remember a 3-word phrase that you used before or a 4-word phrase? You might remember a 10-word phrase, but you're not necessarily going to remember that her hair looked like emeralds in the moonlight. Maybe you would, but you might not. And I'm not saying that's a great way of phrasing it anyway, but if you had it and then you used it like 4 or 5 times, but it's spread within your work, you might completely forget. Because I mean, come on, do you really remember everything you wrote chapters and chapters ago? No. You probably don't even remember like a couple chapters ago, right? And so it's a blind spot. And even an editor wouldn't necessarily pick up on that. And so it does gives you an opportunity. And the great thing about the opportunity is it gives you an opportunity to go deeper. It gives you an opportunity to say more, say something different, which gives more information. That's really the best way of looking at repetition and why it's so helpful to eradicate is that you want to be able to go deeper in your work. All right. Opportunity for depth. That's the point. That is what you should look at when you look at repetition. It is, it's kind of showing you, like somebody said, being lazy. Yeah, it's showing you where you just thought about the same thing in the exact same way, which means, again, you're not giving the audience another way to think about it. Your problem is proper names. Your lead character is on every page. Oh, well, you can actually tell our software to ignore that. So if you have a lead character who has a word has a name and maybe the name is something that's in the database somehow, you can actually tell it to ignore it for the purposes of a report. Let me show you how to do that here. So what you're going to want to do is you want to go to customize word lists. I think it might actually be behind me. Yep. Customize word lists right there. And then you are going to want to do the words to excludeness or character names. But if you do the words to exclude, then you can type it in. So yes, imagine I had a character whose name was Dusty, and so I wanted to get rid of Dust or Dusty or something like that. Yeah, I can do that. Right. In this case, I want to get rid of Serene because Serene is a character name. Go ahead and do that. Done. And now if I go to repeated words, I don't think it should appear anymore. Nope, it's gone. And I could do the same thing with Audra and all of that. So, oh, sorry, I should have looked at the word frequency. But yeah, that's how you do it. So yeah, absolutely. Go ahead and customize that so you do not have that problem. All right. Ah, yes, yes. If you have an important secondary character name as Will, you will want to do that, right? Because otherwise, you will have Will. So I hope everybody followed that, right? You know how to do it now, right? Hit the little gear, go to words to exclude, type it in, and there you go. And is that project specific? Oh, I keep forgetting. It was at one time, and then it wasn't. I want to say, hold on, let me check. I want to say it might not be, but you can exclude the word list so that you can bring it back in. But I might be wrong, and I feel bad I don't remember this answer because we've tested it both ways. um, hold on here. It looks like it is project specific. Okay. So I'm going to say yes. But if you have multiple projects, you can do that. You can export it and then come back in. Does it differentiate between capitals and non-capitalized? No. It is not case sensitive. So if you do put in will because you want it to ignore will for the character, it will ignore will just altogether. Now, that doesn't mean that if it comes up in things like the phrase frequency, it's not going to include that word. So if you say where there's a will, there's a way like 10 times, it'll still show up on that. I'll keep that in mind. I will pass that on to our tech support team. Always looking for some advice for that. So all right. So in the AutoCrit community, we've been having fun this month. We've been doing March writing madness, and we are finally at the final two. I know it's very exciting, and we had a vote and I announced the final two the final two contestants, but I did not in fact read what got them to this point. So I thought it would be fun to do a little tribute to our wonderful writers here in the AutoCrit community by reading the two winning finalists, how they got to this final round. And then we will read the final ones next week, and we will get to show off the winners for this challenge. So it's going to be lots of fun. All right. So here's the first one. I think I might have to reframe this a bit. Evan plucked the bouquet of sunflowers from the desk behind the register, locked up the coffee shop, and texted Lena. On my way home, can't wait to celebrate our anniversary. Lena responded immediately. Great, I've got a surprise for you. And I have one for you, he thought. I'm home, he hollered, walking into their small studio apartment. Lena was standing in front of filled wine glasses on the kitchen island. There you are. Happy anniversary. She kissed him on the cheek as he presented her the sunflowers. You've been so busy juggling work and school. Here's something to brighten your day. Her eyes lit up as she pushed her nose into the center, inhaling deeply. Sunflowers were her favorite. She looked up puzzled as she started to feel woozy and unsteady. Tipping the wine back with a large gulp, he smiled. Oh, I forgot to mention the cherry on top. Juggling Steve along with everything else, right? That arsenic won't take long, dear. As her eyes fluttered, she pointed up to the wine just as he was starting to sway and cough. Neither will the cyanide. And yeah. But if that's a little dark, we have this one. Drew put the sunflower down before he wrung it to death out of worry. It was Evelyn's favorite. The florist had guessed what he came in for before he told her. That had to be a good sign. The barista gave him a slight smile and put a nice coffee on the table. On the house, honey, for a special day, Drew beamed. Beth, you're a peach. I'm going to ask my girl to marry me. Wish me luck. I've got a feeling she'll say yes. She'd be crazy not to. The barista, whose name was Annie, hurried back behind the counter to help with the growing line. Poor old guy, the new hire, was trying to juggle restocking the pastry case while writing out an order. He's been here for hours. Think his date stood him up? No, his wife died 9 years ago, but he doesn't remember. They were married for almost 50 years, and this is where he proposed to her. He comes in here every year on the same day. I'll give him a few more minutes, then I'll call his daughter. Annie sniffled. Evelyn was a lucky girl. That's so sweet. So that was Tony and Sharon from the community. Awesome work, everyone. Those are our finalists for the grand finale. That is not what they will be voting on for the grand finale. Yes, both were really good considering the word count restraint. There were quite a restraints. You also had to non-literally use a fruit, and so there was that involved. Yeah, it was good time, and a sunflower. The challenge for the last challenge is a lot of fun. At least I think it's a lot of fun. I'm curious to see how it goes. Now, if you want to join me for more writing tips, not tomorrow, Thursday, excuse me, I will be hosting the self-editing workshop, which you can join. It is not part of AutoCrit membership because it's an extra bonus workshop, but you can go ahead and sign up there if you would like. Of course, we'll continue to do these educational offerings on this channel as well as the ones in the community. Speaking of ones in the community, tonight at 7 p.m., we have another fantasy club. And tonight we will be looking at some live reads of your work. So if you just want to just pop in and get your work read by me, get my critique on it, a little look under the hood with AutoCrit, maybe some ideas on how you can improve on it. Yeah, this is your jam. Come on in. Come on in. And then we have the horror club tomorrow at 6 p.m. Gareth will be doing a deep dive on a horror work. He calls it his scene dissection. So it'll be lots of fun. Even if you don't write horror, it's going to be worthwhile to look at. The Accountability Club currently weekly on Mondays at 11 a.m. Great way to start off your week. All right. So those are my slides. That's my time. I certainly enjoyed talking to you about repetition this week. It's very important to talk about it. It's really one of the first things to look for when writing, when editing your work. It's a really early it's a way to really level up your work in a hurry because you can get more specific, you can stop treading water, and all of those things. And so I really do recommend looking at it. These tips should help you avoid repetition, use AutoCrit to make it better for yourself. And I will continue to see you around the community. Please like and subscribe, hit the bell for this channel. If there's any streams you would like to see from us in the future about any topics, please let us know, and I will see you around AutoCrit. Bye, everybody. I forgot to hit the button.